Recording started.
All right, we are here to convene the Human Rights Tribunal International for the government of the United States of America. Will the clerk please convene the court?
This is clerk for the court, Kirk Edwin Jensen, to convene the Human Rights Tribunal International for the government of the United States of America on this 93rd day in the year of Yahweh, 6022. Time is approximately 1 o'clock UTC-6. To establish a quorum is necessary to conduct a roll call. Is lead international notary Trent Winsley Saylor seated?
This is International Notary Trent Winsley Saylor. I am seated.
Is International Notary Peter Adrian Nickel seated?
This is International Notary Peter Adrian Nickel, and I am seated.
Is International Notary Kevin Lloyd Lakes seated?
You must have the other script, Kirk. This is Adam, and I'm seated for this hearing.
All right,
Adam,
correction. Is International Notary Adam Benkei?
Yes, I'm seated.
Then there being a court now calls to attention all persons having business with the Human Rights Tribunal International. As the court is now in session, the clerk for the court yields to the lead notary.
Welcome, everyone. If you give me a moment, I would like to do a screen share. This is for the case for respondents of all the members of the Rothschild family. Case number is HRTI-202-00416-0009. The grounds for this international complaint are violations of all articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and slavery. Not for all people who have business within this court. Will the prosecutors please identify yourselves?
Yes, this is lead prosecutor Christopher Michael Doherty. I am seated.
And this is Michael Adam Fathauer, second prosecutor. I am also seated.
Okay. Are any of the respondents present or counsel for the respondents? Once again, are any of the respondents present or counsel for the respondents? Okay. Hearing no response for the respondents or counsel for respondents, this court will go into default in 30 minutes from now. So the court will reconvene at 1:30 UTC-6.
And the correction, it says this court will go into default. It would be the respondents will go into default.
Yes, thank you. The respondents will go into default 30 minutes from now.
And also like to be on the record that this is Keith assisting the prosecution. That the prosecution is convening under Matthew 18, 19, and 20.
Thank you. Can you please stop the recording? Okay, the recording has started. We are here to convene the Human Rights Tribunal International for the government of the United States of America. Will the clerk please convene the court?
This is Kirk Edwin Jensen to convene the Human Rights Tribunal International for the government of the United States of America on this 93rd day in the year of Yahweh, 6022. The time is approximately 1:30 UTC -6. And to establish a quorum, we're going to necessary to conduct a roll call. So I'm going to ask if lead international notary Adam Ben Canaan is seated.
This is International Notary Adam Samuel Ben Canaan, and I'm seated.
And international notary Trent Winsley Saylor seated.
This is International Notary Trent Winsley Saylor. I am seated.
Is international notary Peter Adrian Nickel seated?
This is International Notary Peter Adrian Nickel, and I am seated.
There being a quorum, the clerk for the court now calls to attention all persons having business with the Human Rights Tribunal International. As the court is now in session, the clerk will, for the court, yields to the lead notary.
Thank you, Kirk. Welcome, everyone. If you give me a moment, I would like to do a screen share. Okay. Within this matter is against the Rothschild family. Case numbers HRTI-202-00416-00009. The grounds for this international complaint is violation of all articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and slavery. Now, for all people who have business within this court, can the prosecutors please identify yourselves?
Yes, this is Christopher Michael Doherty, lead prosecutor. I am here. Just wanted to remind the court that we are hereby convened under Matthew 18, verse 19 and 20, and that counsel has been made available at the American National Union Legal Department for respondents in accordance with the Convention of Civil and Political Rights.
This is Michael Adam Fathauer, second prosecutor. I'm also here and present.
Okay, are any of the respondents or counsel for respondents present? Now, respondents can have right to legal counsel from the annual legal department under political and civil rights. Are the respondents present or any of the counsel for the respondents? Are the respondents present or any of the counsel for the respondents?
Mr. Rowe, you here?
I am. The legal department for the American National Union is present, and since the respondents have not appeared at this time, it'll be considered moot, and I'll yield this back to the motion of the court that's in progress.
Okay. Will the prosecution please state the claims to the subject matter of this case and the particulars to these charges? Please proceed.
Thank you. Share screen. Thank you. The human rights violators are the Rothschild family. The full name or name of agency would be the Rothschild family, located at the city-state of the City of London. The name of the city is the City of London. Chain of title for respondents is Mayor Amschel Bauer, who did a name change beginning in 1760 AD. City type is municipal and unincorporated. Human rights violated. Actually, sorry, let me start over. Here we go. For the record, I would put forth for agreement that the respondent is in default at this time because they haven't responded to the servicing of charges. All right, I'm going to proceed with my opening statement. Good afternoon to all in attendance today for the Human Rights Tribunal International hearing for the Rothschild family. Thank you for your attendance, and I trust we will all have a learning experience today. The following hearing today is not a common one, but very uncommon due to many reasons. But one of the main reasons is because of the such far-reaching effect in our world over a long period of time. Today you will learn of a family that's created a doctrine wherein the people subjected to it are accepting of their own demise and detriment, which results into self-hatred. Within the evidence put forth, you will hear how the Rothschild family seized controlling interest of the Bank of England to control the City of London Corporation, thereby taking control of the monetary interest of the tripartite to implement their scheme of a one world government. Another main reason for this hearing today is to show evidence by the prosecution and to ask to move this court to consider all the facts in the order as given, so the correct judgment can be rendered for all humanity living at this time against the backdrop of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Law of Nations. In case number HRTI 2020-0416-00009, the relief sought comes now. The government of the United States of America, by and through the American National Union Legal Department and the ANU liaisons, move this court pursuant to the Law of Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to the United States of America to direct the Human Rights Tribunal to file the complaint with evidence in the subject case on the grounds that it is necessary for the legal liaison to explain the charges against respondents so that there is due process of order for all. The burden of proof, burden of rebuttal. The respondent has rebuttal obligation. The burden of proof is by a preponderance of the evidence. The respondents are charged with 30 violations against articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Violations are UDHR Articles 1 through 30. Prosecutor in this case offers the evidence to be reviewed by the court's tribunal in fairness and balance in determining if the 30 specific violations apply to the respondent. And again, the backdrop platform for today's hearing would be the Law of Nations as well as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Let it be clear that these writings and documents should be non-invasive to all who want to live in peace. The exercise of liberty to freedom is clearly given so each society can thrive and flourish with their creativity given by our Creator. At this time, the prosecutor would ask the court's permission to call forth a special prosecutor as needed, Keith Edward Livingway. Before moving to the next slide, I will read from the complaint. For the record, again, it's the Rothschild family. It's the human rights violator, located at the City of London, within the City of London city-state. And we'll proceed. Human rights articles violated. All articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, with intent to render the inhabitants stateless, to use as collateral, as backing for Federal Reserve notes, to which are borrowed into existence at interest from the Federal Reserve System, and for the purpose of stealing the inhabitants' time and intangible property rights. Going into the brief narrative. Throughout the Middle Ages,
I would like to add in there the intangible property rights, also including equity. The main thing is equity that they're after, which is somebody builds a building, make sure the people that own the building either foreclosed, dishonored, or killed so they can take the building on a loan that never existed, that was paid the second the promissory note was signed. Just wanted to add that to there. So the main purpose is to steal other people's equity. You see a building, you like it, you want to, somebody borrows, somebody creates into existence in a promissory note your money. And then you don't want the money because you can print the money all you want. Okay? If you can print your own money, you can print all you want. Why would you want that back in payment? You want the building, which was the purpose of the 16th Amendment and their corporation, which was you can't question the debt. I believe that was the one it was. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. And we're the one that states that you can't question the debt. Why they can't, why no one within the Bar Association or anybody else can claim only U.S. currency and Federal Reserve notes. That's the reason, because what it does is when you question the debt and you only request U.S. currency, that cuts the Rothschilds' rights within this contract that they have, that they may want the building. So it cuts off their foreclosures when that happens. The foreclosure is to get the house, not the money. They don't need the money. They can print the money. That's not a big deal. The idea is to take the tangible property and sever your intangible property to that tangible property. They want to sever those ties. And they want to do it with the appearance of legality, when in fact the whole scheme was set up to where you can't pay the loan off anyways, no matter what you do, because they never print the interest. All right, so I'm gonna yield back to you, Doherty.
So
Thank you for that.
are you excuse me a second. Are you stating that their whole system is established by a lesser and a greater inequality system, where it kind of like reverses into debt so they can take the real private property?
It's a created monopoly with the appearance of competition. It's a well, I'm sorry, with the appearance or the facade of capitalism. True capitalism isn't this way, but when you have a monopoly that is the backdrop of the facade of capitalism, yeah, you've got a problem, a big problem, because people blame capitalism for what the monopoly is doing. And that way they escape liability every single time. They're out the back door before anybody knows it. And the capitalist is sitting there with his, with his hands up going, I don't know what happened. Sure you didn't, you liar, blah, blah, blah. Now we got to go to communism. Because communism is great. It's for the people. It's going to be all equal. And that's why these constant changes in political ideologies from one to 2 or 3 generations to the next. It's really a constant disruption of life. So yeah, if you want to go out, we can get a little bit more history on them, on why this is and why these people do what they do.
Yep. So there's information everywhere that indicate that the Rothschilds have a history of Satanism. So reading the brief narrative, throughout the Middle Ages, the hexagram was used by Arab magicians and Satanists. The respondents are Satanists that adopted the red hexagram when Mayor Amschel Bauer hung a red hexagram in front of their house to identify the home. Mayor Amschel then decided to take the name Red Shield Rothschild in German after the Red Seal of Solomon. 2 centuries later, the hexagram was placed on the Israeli flag, creation of the respondents. Now, pictured here is the 4th Lord Rothschild. His name is Jacob Rothschild. He's pictured with Marina Abramovic, who's well known for being into witchcraft and spirit cooking, and they are pictured together in front of a painting of Satan. Now, this link here is a link to a document that you'll see here, populated. It was part of the library of the CIA.gov, written by Springmeyer, and it points to the fact that the British Rothschild family worships Satan. It says that they set a place for him at their table. The Rothschilds have been Satanists for many generations. Rothschilds are an important part of the history of the Seal of Solomon. In fact, the Seal of Solomon hexagram was not considered a Jewish symbol before the Rothschilds began using it. And so, let's go back here. Give me a moment.
And please keep in mind that just because that's on the Israeli flag does not mean the people of Israel or Israel are following it. They just don't know what it is. They think it's the Star of David. But people will swear that they're the devil's people. You know, you have a lot of these guys around there. So this is this little bit of information is not in any way, shape, or form to disparage the Israeli people. What it is to warn them that this is what's going on, and we're going to show you in just a few how that happened. So go ahead.
That's correct. Absolutely correct. Thank you for that. So moving on, the three city-state empire consisting of the City of London, Vatican City, and City of Washington claims it is an independent entity that is not subject to any national authority, has its own laws, and pays no taxes. The aforementioned empire usurps the monetary, spiritual, and military fate of nations through the Bank of England located on the City of London Corporation, hereinafter the Crown, to which the monetary interests are controlled by the respondents. And so we'll delve into that in a few to get you the history of the three city-state empire. But to establish the fact that the Rothschilds control the City of London Corporation, on June 19th, 1815, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, son of Mayor Amschel Bauer, obtained information that was conveyed through a messenger service that he controlled regarding the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. By driving the sale of British consols early, which was government bonds, he made it appear that Lord Wellington had lost the battle, which led to the crash of the London stock market. This weakened the Bank of England, providing the respondents an opportunity to take control of the Bank of England located in the City of London, the financial district also known as the Crown. Then in 1829, the respondents purchased Jerusalem with a stolen bounty from the City of London. When the respondents purchased Jerusalem, the respondents then manipulated the fulfillment of revelations, wherein a six-day war was orchestrated in 1967 by the respondents, thereby using the Israeli people as cannon fodder, while the respondents stripped the land of all its natural minerals and resources, using 400 separate mining companies to fulfill the task. Now, I'm going to pull this up. This link here will bring you to this link here. So this was a publication in the Niles Weekly Register, which was a small-sized newspaper out of Baltimore, began in 1811, and was a primary source for national political news on the first half of the 19th century, wherein it reads, Jerusalem, with a text beginning, there is a report that the Rothschilds have purchased Jerusalem. We see nothing improbable that in the pecuniary distress of the Sultan, with more, he should sell some part of his dominions to preserve the rest, or that the Rothschilds should purchase the ancient capital of their nation. Their wealth is beyond the desire, perhaps even of avarice, and so situated, it is reasonable to suppose that they may seek something else to gratify their ambition that shall produce most important effects.
Okay, so I'm sorry, that's the same process that they work over here, which is he gave the Sultan a loan.
Okay.
And the Sultan couldn't pay it. Why? Because the interest is so high. The interest went through the roof. Plus, they never printed the interest. So he took Jerusalem. He stole it. Same way they did this. They do this to everybody. It's the same process. If you'll read that, you'll see what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
Okay.
I caught it when they said that. The Sultan is a grant difficulty. Go ahead.
If secured in the possession, and which may be brought about by money, they might instantly, as it were, gather a large nation together, soon to become capable of defending itself and having a wonderful influence over the commerce and condition of the East, rendering Judea again the place of deposit of a large portion of the wealth of the ancient world. To the Sultan, the country is of no great value, but in the hands of the Jews, according to this article, directed by such men as the Rothschilds, what might it not become, and in a short period of time. The Sultan is in great difficulty. Baron Rothschild was proceeding to Constantinople, and a second rebuilding of the temple is not amongst the most strange things expected in these strange times. Now, I'd request if the Special Prosecutor Keith could explain to the court as to why the respondents would purchase Jerusalem and why this may be significant as to any alleged authority.
I think number one, they hijacked the new covenant. In other words, to make it appear on earth that they had some kind of authority over the new covenant. And number two, to take as many minerals as they possibly could. And we have personal experience with that. There are 400 companies there. Netanyahu knows exactly what's going on. They're running. They're pulling oil out of northeast Israel now. They've been doing this. This has all been being set up and everything, because you know when you do the word God, it's gold, oil, diamonds. That's all they've been after for years, ever since the Rothschilds have gone from generation to generation. And yes, we go from 1800 or 1829, I believe, and then shoot right up to 1967. Well, these plans are all put in place from generation to generation. They think 100 years down the road, 150 years down the road, not within their own lifetime. Because remember, they worship Satan and Lucifer. So if that's the case, then what their idea is that they work in his timeline. And so when they do plans, the plans could be 150 years later. They could be implemented. Not in this specific human being's lifetime, it'll be in their so-called God's lifetime.
Thank you.
I say so-called because servants can't become a god. So there you go.
Okay. Moving along, the bonded indebtedness of the world is stolen assets by the crown and therefore controlled by the respondents. The temple bar is the juristic arm of the crown and holds an exclusive monopoly on global legal fraud through the Bar Association franchises. And again, this information is all over, well known. The temple bar is comprised of 4 inns of court, to which are the Middle Temple, Inner Temple, Lincoln's Inn, and Gray's Inn, which is similar to the Mosaic law structure.
Okay, now keep in mind when they do this, there's a specific case. Any unlawful act is no act at all, and the Rothschilds know this. You can go tell. What they do is they give the appearance of ownership, when in fact it's own nothing, control everything. That's their motto. So along with the Rockefellers, even though the Rockefellers are not not the respondents today. What I'm saying here is that they give the appearance of ownership, meaning they took something, but no, a fraudulent act is no act at all. So the real process is to sever your intangible property to the property. So for instance, you have a house foreclosure, okay? The house was already paid for when you signed the promissory note, because the promissory note was deposited into a bank account and they wrote a check off of it. When they did that, the bank said the loan was paid for, or the loan was paid, otherwise you're check kiting. Okay, so the clock starts when you start making payments, because that's the scheme to sever your intangible property to that house. That's all they have to do. And give it the appearance of ownership. The appearance of ownership is there to the rest of the people. Oh, well, the bank bought it back. Well, bank can't buy it back. They don't have any more money to create. That's an appearance of an auction. That's an appearance of something that the bank has the money to buy that back. What are they going to do? Use your money to buy it back? Doesn't make any sense. Banks are not supposed to own property. So all those are appearances. So what they're doing is they're severing, in your mind, severing your intangible property right to the property. Very difficult to get people to understand that property is still theirs, and anything that they do with it is you're still liable for it, no matter what. You're still liable for the property. You can legally still be sued if that property is sitting there and it's empty, and it says, oh, the bank is owned it. No, the bank just has control of it through intangible property rights, stolen intangible property rights. And if anybody gets hurt on that property, they can still go and sue the former owner just by walking on it and stumbling or hitting them their head or whatever. Those people can still be sued. And then what the lawyers will do is they'll come up and say, oh, no, you can't sue the bank. The bank has immunity. It can't be sued for anything that happens. It's not liable for anything. Why? Because it's not the owner. The previous owner is still the owner. So this is a process by which the Rothschilds come in and they cloud many titles, because there's no actual transfer of property when they come in. It's only the appearance of transfer and the severance of severance of intangible property to the home. The appearance of the severance of intangible property to the home. Okay, so that's all. The best way to explain that thing.
Wouldn't that be fair to say that in that scenario, it's also economic slavery, severing in that scenario, severing the alleged homeowners' intangible property rights to tangible property, and basically using that person's energy as a caretaker of the land and never being able to pay anything off because it's a legal impossibility created.
Oh, it's out and outright theft if the man actually owned the property, but if he's a slave, he never owned anything. So that's slavery. Basically, what it does is they treat you as a slave. You're just renting it to them. That's why they say that you're a tenant. You're an owner until you're a tenant. They keep switching titles and all this other stuff, because either way, you're just an object, a part of the property. Your property itself to them.
Are you implying that this is a socialist system where they're stealing from someone to give to someone else?
Same difference, yeah. Politically, yeah, you could look at it that way. Robbing Peter to pay Paul. I believe that's where that statement came from. It's a whole doctrine of how you cunningly steal from people and they'd have no idea you just did it. You're doing it right in front of them. They don't recognize it as a theft. They don't recognize it as oh, well, it's not a theft because blah, blah, blah. Okay, then now I'm a slave because apparently I'm the property too. So they take all your equity. Well, the only way that somebody can take equity from someone else and do it legally is through slavery. So basically, which is it? Am I a slave, or are you stealing from me?
Right.
That's the question.
That's the question.
The answer to either one side is the violation of all 30 articles of the UDHR and slavery. There, what else can you say? I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So to point out the further nefarious acts of the Crown, to have the false Declaration of Independence recognized internationally, Middle Templar King George III, at the time of the Treaty of Paris, he was recognized as Prince George III, but eventually became King George, agreed in the Treaty of Paris of 1783 to establish the legal crown entity of the unincorporated United States. The lowercase t, this particular entity broke the chain of title that was established under the Articles of Confederation, with the entity being an uppercase T in the name of the nation. King George III also placed himself as arch-treasurer to this entity, which again is a grievous violation of the law of nations. The colonies are referred to internally as Crown Temple states. This created the foundation for the U.S. states, lowercase s states, which are illegal states within the original states of the Union, established from 1774 to present time under the Articles of Association and Articles of Confederation. So, zoom in so you all can see that. So he did name himself as arch treasurer of the incorporated crown entity, the United States of America.
And keep in mind that that entity on record didn't really exist, that everybody knew about it until 1789. It never existed because it was placed in their preamble 6 years later, when the actual established government was the United States of America, that was completed in 1781, that started in 1776. From the original article or Declaration of Independence, which was the real one, the real Declaration of Independence, not the fake one that was done by that other guy. It'll come to me in a minute. I keep forgetting his name.
Adam Weishaupt.
There you go. Thank you.
And so this link will give you a full text, the full text of the preamble. Now, bar attorneys in the United States owe their allegiance and pledge their oaths to the Crown. All bar associations throughout the world are signatories and franchises to the International Bar Association, located at the Inns of Court of the Crown Temple, with their global headquarters located at London, England. Furthermore, the Crown Bar Associations, a creation of the respondents. Now down here is an excerpt written from Fruit from a Poisonous Tree by Juris Doctorate Melvin Stamper. It's extracted from page 58. So furthermore, the Crown Bar Associations, a creation of the respondents, are actively barring the inhabitants from their original state governments, formed into a republic, having never published a written social compact agreement from the inhabitants, which forms the basis of a legal society. Now, Colonel Edward Mandelhaus, who is the agent provocateur of Rothschild, the head of the European central banks, was assigned to oversee the president and the Congress in the implementation of the central bankers' plans. House is attributed with giving direction and strategy to be implemented by the president and the senators to enslave the American people with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act and Amendments 16 and 17. Support for the legal presumption that the American people had volunteered to participate in the United States democracy was legislated within the 17th Amendment in 1913. In that, participation in federal elections for U.S. Senator established the legal presumption necessary in determining that you were a federal citizen. The scheme also provided for the control of the courts via the 1913 creation of the American Bar Association. And so what Stamper is referring to here is the creation of the judicial division within the American Bar Association, established in 1913. And so that set up the foundation for them to come in and eventually hijack the judicial departments of the state constitutions, which we'll allude to and delve into in a little bit in a few minutes. So the scheme also provided for the control of the courts via the 1913 creation of the American Bar Association, whose parent organization was the European International Bar Association, which was the creation of Rothschild. This allowed the international bankers to control the practice of law, in that the only ones permitted to practice before the courts were those who were educated under their brand of law, which was only admiralty and contract law. Common law of the people was to be replaced, as it gave the natural man many jurisdictional protections from the bankers' legislation. When the Congress made its first attempt to throw out the common law and replace it with admiralty and contract law, the Supreme Court rejected the proposed rules of court, explaining that the proposed rules would bring into existence a national police state. So Roosevelt stacked the High Court and waited for a case upon which the demise of common law could be accomplished. Erie Railroad versus Tompkins came along in 1938 and gave the court the opportunity the Constitution did not. Therefore, common law at the federal level was to be no more. These facts are proof the respondent-controlled associations are actively rendering the inhabitants to an inferior status of statelessness as defined within the law of nations, thereby treating the inhabitants as property, a violation of all 30 articles of the UDHR. Quote, Law of Nations, Chapter 18, Book 1, Establishment of a Nation in a Country, Paragraph 213, Inhabitants. The inhabitants, as distinguished from citizens, are foreigners who are permitted to settle and stay in the country. Bound to the society by their residence, they are subject to the laws of the state. While they reside in it, and they are obligated to defend it because it grants them protection, though they do not participate in all the rights of citizens. They enjoy only the advantages which the law or customs give them. The perpetual inhabitants are those who have received the right of perpetual residence. These are kind of citizens of an inferior order and are united to the society without participating in all its advantages. The children follow the condition of their fathers, and as the state has given to these the right of perpetual residence, their right passes to their posterity. Now, here is evidence of the hijacking of the state constitutions. Further, the respondents' bar associations have amended state constitutions as evidenced herein from judicial departments to judiciaries, and made it a requirement to be a member of their private membership association to be able to qualify for a position in the newly formed judiciary. Further wrote the Florida bar into the Constitution itself without any popular vote whatsoever, and have been terrorizing inhabitants of the state of Florida ever since. The same thing has happened in many states around the same time. So this is Article 6 of the Florida Constitution before 1968. There's a link to that. And after 1968, you can see there's no notes made towards the change of the term from judicial department to judiciary, and they have a whole new set of rules and procedures, as well as writing the bar into the Constitution. And we'll point out that this is a violation of law of nations in a few minutes. Still today, the American Bar Association members continue to attack the inhabitants and American nationals and residents of the United States of America without provocation, thereby using its privately owned police force outside any constitution. Therefore, the respondents are in breach of duty of care for stealing the inhabitants' time to live their lives to the will of our Father in heaven. Check the chat. Just give me a moment. All right. As previously stated, the Rothschild family, like no other family on the face of the earth, has chosen to worship Satan. Through Satan, they have set up a system within the world that has lured people to Satan and is at war with heaven. Generations of children have been born into the system that has every distraction away from eternal life in heaven. A moment to check the chat. Slide 8. Three-city state empire. We have a bit of a background. I'm not going to read this again, but I want to explain that the respondents did seize control of the crown, and we have this link up. All right. So at the end of the Battle of Waterloo, Nathan Rothschild, knowing that information is power, stationed his trusted agent Rothworth near the battlefield. As soon as the battle was over, Rothworth quickly returned to London, delivering the news to Rothschild 24 hours ahead of Wellington's courier. A victory by Napoleon would have devastated Britain's financial system. Nathan stationed himself in his usual place next to an ancient pillar in the stock market. Knowing he would be observed, he hung his head and began openly to sell huge numbers of British government bonds, also known as consols. Believing this to mean that Napoleon must have won, everyone started to sell their British bonds as well. The bottom fell out of the market, and Rothschild had his agents buying up all the hugely devalued bonds. So the next link in the PowerPoint presentation brings you to here. This is to give you the background of the three-city state empire. World events, most of which are engineered, leave a trail that leads to the architects. We next discovered that there are 3 cities on Earth that come under no national authority. They have separate laws. They pay no taxes. They have their own police force and even possess their own flag of independence. These three cities control the economy, military onslaughts, and the spiritual beings of those in power. Three cities are actually corporations, and they are the City of London, District of Columbia, and the Vatican, Vatican City.
Yeah, I want to make a correction there. It was actually not the District of Columbia; it's the City of Washington.
City of Washington, correct. And
Yeah,
Vatican City,
a lot of them like to put in the District of Columbia so that they can keep George Washington out of the mix. There's something they're hiding there between George Washington and the Rothschilds.
Thank you for that. That's absolutely true.
Politicians, courts, education institutions, food supply, natural resources, foreign policies, economies, media, and the money flow of most nations, as well as 80% of the world's entire wealth.
Their ultimate aim.
Yeah, how do you get 80% of the entire wealth? Unless you're stealing it. I mean, if you really look at it this way, okay, how does a guy wear $200 sneakers if he has no job? Or how does a guy live in $1 million home when he has no active employment or any business? If you start thinking about that, you go, wait a minute, how's he making money and affording this house if he has no active business that he's in or has any employment? He doesn't work for any, firm or anything like that. So how does a bank start out in a trailer? Because I've seen them start out in trailers before. I don't know if you guys know that. They'll start out in these mobile homes. 6 months later, they've got an enormous building. The only way you can do that, and there's only a certain amount of money you can honestly make in a day that a man or a woman can produce in a day. There's only a certain amount of equity you can produce because there's only a certain amount of time. The only way it goes from there to there is there's something nefarious going on. It goes from a trailer to a big brick building. As a matter of fact, some of these buildings are giants. You ever see a bank open up? You'll see it in a little trailer sometimes. And all of a sudden, it's got a huge bank building in 6 months, 6 months later. So it's a nice scheme. It works. And that's how you get to be able to control 80% of the world's wealth is when you're stealing it.
Their ultimate aim is to build a totalitarian rule on a global scale where people will be divided into rulers and the ruled after they've depopulated the world to numbers they wish to rule over. What we need to understand is the world does not work according to what we have been led to believe. We are drowning in misinformation. Now, the Roman Empire prevails through the City of London Incorporated. The City of London was formed when the Romans arrived in Great Britain 2,000 years ago and started a trading post on the River Thames. Exactly 1,000 years later, William the Conqueror gave sovereign status to the City of Londoners in 1694, allowing them to continue enjoying separate rights and privileges so long as they recognized William the Conqueror as king. The kings that succeeded William, however, decided to build a new capital city and named it Westminster. There have been numerous instances of the king and the city's mayor at loggerheads with each other. What is peculiar is that the laws passed by the British Parliament do not apply to the City of London. However, the City of London is not an independent nation like the Vatican, or claimed to be, like the Vatican claims to be. Today, the City of London is 1 square mile city. The two Londons have separate city halls and elect separate mayors, who collect separate taxes to fund separate police who enforce separate laws. The City of London has its own separate flag and crest, while London City does not. The mayor of the City of London has a fancy title, the Right Honorable Lord Mayor of London, and rides a golden carriage to Guildhall, while the Mayor of London wears a suit and takes a bus. The Mayor of London has no power over the Right Honorable Lord Mayor of London, City of London Corporation. What's unique is that the City of London is a corporation and is older than the United Kingdom itself, but has a representative in the UK Parliament through a person known as the Remembrancer, who is present to protect the city's interests. Herein is evidence that the City of London houses the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, thereby controlling the City of London, the Lloyds of London, the London Stock Exchange, all British banks, branch offices of 384 foreign banks, 70 USA banks, Fleet Street's newspaper and publishing monopolies, headquarters for the worldwide Freemasonry, headquarters for worldwide money cartel known as the Crown. The City of London, again, is controlled by the Bank of England, a private corporation owned by the Rothschild family after Nathan Rothschild crashed the English stock market in 1812 and took control of the Bank of England. The Queen refers to the City of London Corporation as the firm. That's well known internationally, but it's known as the Crown, not representing the royalty of Britain. Buckingham Palace is in London, but not the City of London, and the city is not part of England. City of London directly and indirectly controls all mayors, councils, regional councils, multinational and transnational banks, corporations, judicial systems through Old Bailey, Royal Courts of Justice in London, as well as the Temple Bar, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Vatican Bank through N.M. Rothschild & Sons, London, Italian subsidiary Torlonia, European Central Bank, the United States Federal Reserve, Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland, and the European Union and the United Nations Organization. The Crown controls the global financial system and runs the governments of all Commonwealth countries and many non-Commonwealth Western nations. The Crown traces back to the Vatican, which is headed by the Pope. In essence, the City of London Corporation would become the One World Earth Corporation and would be privately own the world. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was passed by U.S. Congress, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned banking system that does not belong to America or Americans.
Okay, if I may.
Yes.
The connection there is this. If the Rothschilds run the United Nations, and the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what makes them not subject to it? Nothing. Nothing makes them not. They are subject to the UDHR. They and in turn own it. If they own it, then that's what they're doing. That's what they're subject to. Any CEO is still subject to the corporate bylaws and its constitution or articles of association or organization, regardless. So if they're violating their own bylaws, which would be the UDHR, that corporation, it goes to show that it would be subject to it, and therefore no person on this earth is subject to the Rothschilds or any of their organizations. That's what we're trying to establish here. They're claiming that they're claiming slaves through actions and through what they do and how they do it and how they treat people. But in reality, according to their own rules and their own declarations, they don't own any person on earth. So why can't we establish that today? That the Rothschilds family doesn't own one person on earth. And therefore, we can cut out this fiasco and this lie that they claim that all people are subject to them or all persons are subject to them, and therefore they're allowed to murder as many as they want with impunity and without any liability. You see, when you claim that you can depopulate something, it means that you have the ownership of something because you have the ability to dispose of it. Disposing of something is ownership. And ownership is being able to dispose of something. But according to their own declaration that they adopted wholeheartedly, by the way, put it in the newspaper, the whole thing, they relinquished control and or ownership of all persons. Yet they act as if they didn't. And start going along with this whole depopulation thing through SARS and COVID and all this other crap. Connected to the last case, which was the Gates and I think it's Sarducci case, or I can't remember his name.
Fauci and
Fauci,
WHO.
yeah. I don't know why I said Sarducci, so strike that, please. So at any rate, what I'm saying here is that that would be intent to commit a crime. To say that we're going to go ahead and depopulate everything, but yet you have no disposal rights and therefore no ownership rights, that's genocide. So we've moved from slavery to genocide. And would like to motion the court to add that that crime to this to the indictment and the complaint.
Moving forward, in the year 2010, the metes and bounds and seaward boundaries of the United States of America were claimed. There were no governments in existence that were founded upon social compact prior to 2010, or that offered an oath to the state. Therefore, to deliver the inhabitants' persons back into the states of the Union, a national government under the country styled as the United States of America was revamped under first in time, first in right, found within the Articles of Confederation from 1781, as amended. This would free the people up from being claimed by the respondent's scheme to render the inhabitants stateless citizens of the three city-state empire. The following PDF explains the existence of Washington, D.C., a city-state of the three city-state empire currently controlled by the respondents through the City of London, who have sought to disrupt this union's commerce by setting up an overlay survey of the original survey of the General Post Office of 1775 and the original Union of 1774 to present, thereby rendering the inhabitants stateless citizens of the District of Columbia and robbing the inhabitants of their inheritance. In essence, the respondents, through their bar associations, are robbing the inhabitants of their family history, and that is specific to creating a slave. This is how slaves are created, by not knowing who they are. Now, PDF that I was referring to is right here. So according to the Naturalization Act under Section 101A, definitions 7701, Title 26, Subtitle F, Chapter 79, persons residing outside the United States. If any citizen or resident of the United States does not reside in and is not found in any United States judicial district, such citizen or resident shall be treated as residing in the District of Columbia for purposes of any provision of this title, relating to jurisdiction of courts or enforcement of summons.
Right, that's called trafficking in persons.
Yep. So overview, all U.S. citizens are citizens of the District of Columbia. I went from slide 12 to slide 20. District of Columbia is not a state and only seeking statehood. U.S. citizens are stateless because the District of Columbia is not a state.
Right, then it moves on, sorry. Then it moves on to what they do then is once their person's put in the District of Columbia, under Title 31, under accepting gifts, they transfer that person that was created by the birth certificate to the Federal Reserve in an account in the Federal Reserve to be governed by the Internal Revenue Trust offshore. That's when they transfer your person offshore into U.S. territories. So it goes from the states, moves right into the District of Columbia, then is transferred by the treasurer, Title 31, accepting gifts, and then the end of the demise is Title 31, Section 3128 and 3113, one's accepting gifts and one's proof of death to support payment. So when you die, in other words, they have an insurance policy on your person. Still doesn't transfer ownership to them, but you know how they are.
Mm-hmm.
They have to sever and or bar your intangible property right to your person. That's how they operate. You're still responsible for what they do. In other words, when they go and they control everything. So just for instance, when they go to a war in Iraq and they invade a sovereign country, they have no business doing. Everyone within this country is liable for that, but you can't stop it, nor can you witness against it, because they have you severed from your person, your intangible property right to your person. And that's what they call the bar. They're barring you from it. And when they do that, they're also severing your tie to any form of a government. So they just kind of throw you aside. Here, we're gonna block them from their person. We're gonna keep that person liable for it. We're gonna make that person liable for the war debt it costs to do the invasion, but at the same time, we're gonna go ahead and profit from it, meaning the Rothschilds are profiting from that war. So they take the profits and they stick you with a bill and cut you off from your person being able to speak for that person. Because how many people that put trustee behind their name under that person, they say, oh, you can't do that. We could probably call 20 people that have tried it, and they'll say the same thing. Yeah, they said I couldn't do that, or they were all upset over it. Because they can't, the whole idea of the bar is to cut you off from government and to cut you off from the person. So they speak for you and your person under power of attorney, and you can't do anything to stop it, thereby holding you as surety for it. It's horrible. It is a horrible scheme. It's horrible to be on the other side of that scheme. It's actually a nightmare. Because somebody's out there doing something in your name, and you can't stop them. According to them, they've got you barred, but they still have the power to hold you liable for it. I didn't say they had the authority to do it. They have the power to force it on you through their police force and their National Guard and all that. They just do it by force. So go ahead.
Mhm. U.S. citizens do not possess an oath or affirmation to anything which is evidence of a stateless person. No nationality, no state equals stateless, and no legal standing in any court of law.
Matter of fact, you're cut off from it because they have a bar member barring you from the court.
Correct.
So that you have any say in it.
Yep, that's exactly what's going on. Stateless persons are under the privilege of any district or state that would grant them residency. No rights exist except for human rights, and the bars associations are actively barring you from even those.
Well, they're trying.
They're trying anyway. There are approximately 317 million U.S. citizens in the District of Columbia that are farmed out as residents of the lowercase s states of the original Confederacy called the United States of America. The United States of 1789 was a trust owned by the Vatican. Notice that the Pentagon is outside of the district. This is the correct flag of the U.S. citizens within the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C., residing within all of the states. U.S. citizens are flying the wrong flag by flying the stars and stripes. U.S. citizens are violating international law by flying the wrong flag, yet we're never told. If anyone is interested in taking an oath or affirmation to any state or to the United States of America, the only place that administers an oath or affirmation that is standing today is the government of the United States of America. None of the states will issue an oath or affirmation because they are all operating by private membership associations through the bar.
Right. Would like to correct something for the record that state should be in upper and lowercase letters. If anyone is interested in taking an oath or affirmation to any state, that should be in upper and lowercase letters, not all lowercase letters.
Yep. This one here, correct?
Yes.
Alrighty. Further, violations of the Law of Nations and all 30 articles of the UDHR as stated before, the respondents have, through their associations, have sought to render the inhabitants as mere property by implementing a scheme to use the inhabitants as collateral for debt obligations to the Federal Reserve banking system, while also hiring the inhabitants, as already outlined, from their state governments, as the respondent-controlled bar associations have hijacked the state constitutions, which is a grievous violation of the law of the nations, as evidenced within the complaint and listed below. Now, Special Prosecutor Keith just alluded to the scheme to render the inhabitants as collateral. Let me pull these up. If you wouldn't mind briefly touching upon Title 3128 and 3113 again.
Right. This is why they can't do a, here, it says finding a death made by an officer or employee of the United States government authorized to, by law to make the finding is sufficient proof of death to allow credit in the accounts of the Federal Reserve Bank or accountable official of the Department of the Treasury in the case involving the transfer, exchange, reissue, redemption, or payment of obligations of the government, including obligations guaranteed by the government for which the Secretary of Treasury acts as transfer agent. So there you go. That's your death certificate. That's why they can't say, for instance, on the Floyd case, okay, just up in Michigan just a little while ago, he wasn't declared dead until he got to the hospital because they couldn't, because they didn't have a proper officer or employee to do it. That would be doctors. They work for the feds. So that's why when you have a baby, they deliver you to the Fed. You get my meaning? That's what doctors do. They deliver you to the Fed through the birth certificate.
Birth certificate. Yep.
Yeah, and offshore. They're delivering your person offshore. It's a crime, but you know how they are. Now they have accepting gifts, and what we mean by that is they may accept a government a gift of money made only in condition to be used to reduce the public debt. So they're using your birth certificate and your labor to reduce the public debt. If you read the whole thing, that's exactly what they're doing. That's slavery. Because see, back in 1929, and I don't have that information at the moment, but I can tell you, and it is easily found if we really kind of dug a little bit. I went into the law library, and it was one of those days that I'd gone into the law library. I just walked right over, walked through a couple of hallways, turned right, went down a couple of a little ways, I guess, about 10 feet or so, turned left into where all the books were, opened a book or picked out a book, opened it up right to the page where they talked about the Mississippi legislature was talking about that it would take 41 years to mine all of the gold in the world to pay the debt off at that time, which was in 1929. And that's when it dawned on me, because I was listening to Tom Schaff and how they had deposited the promissory note and wrote a check off of it. And I said, I wonder if they did that same thing with the birth certificate. And I went in, and 2.5 hours later, I found those two sections, which was accepting gifts and payment of their so-called national debt. The government's a farce. The government's always been a corporation. And then a proof of death to support payment. When I had those two things, I knew that I'd actually found something quite big, that the birth certificates were transferred and deposited into the Federal Reserve. And I didn't know at the time that your person was shipped offshore. I didn't realize that to make you stateless. And if that's all the case, that was the device used to sever you from your person. That's what they did. That's how they did it, how they barred you from it. And it was a device used by the Bar Association, the American Bar Association, under the direction and control of the International Bar Association and the Rothschild family, thereby enslaving the man or woman from their person, which was their commerce. It's a horrible thing to happen. It's horrible. It's sinister. It's just sick. to do that to people, and you do it to many, many families. And you have to have some kind of inflated ego to think that that you are able to do that with impunity. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead, Doherty. That's fine. Just go ahead and let her rip. No, I'm with the video.
Right. Yep. So video evidence of hijacking of courts, laws, and state governments by the Bar Private Membership Association. This is lawyer bragging about lawyers' immunity.
Inadvertently gotten a sassy answer to that question from attorney Mark Koplik in its hidden camera video. Koplik explained to the representative of the phony African minister why he never worried about government subpoenas.
They don't send the lawyers to jail because we run the country.
You run the country?
Still do.
I love it.
Still do.
I should say some lawyers run the country.
So you are some of them, 2 of them.
Yeah, a small amount.
We're still members of a privileged class in this country.
So what does it mean you run the country? It means you...
We make the laws, and when we do so, we make them in a way that is advantageous to the lawyers.
Sorry about that.
Okay, so are you saying they've caused much suffering to the human population, and can you emphasize on that type of suffering?
Yeah, it's called dehumanizing. That's called separation of families. It's a violation of international law. Because they're separating them from their it's called a double booking system, if you want to, per se. They're saying that you agreed for them to go into Iraq. That was all, you agreed to that. And when you agreed to that, you agreed to pay the debt. Well, nobody did. It's called lying on the international record. So therefore, stealing more equity. All this is about stealing time and stealing equity. And severing you from any intangible rights that you may have. And that's called mental torture. It's a constant mental torture. Mainly also constant physical torture, because as you're working, most of your so-called benefits are not benefits at all. All you're doing is giving something to somebody, and they say, okay, here, I'm going to give it back to you. Well, what's the point? That doesn't make any sense. If you know what I mean. Yeah, go ahead.
So the lawyers and attorneys of the deep state. This is a publication of record published by the Reign of the Heaven Society Post. It says the signatories to the government of the United States of America are not anti-law nor anti-government, and believe that what is going to be said or claimed by the members of the American Bar Association, International Bar Association, are under the direction of the City of London, which we've outlined today. The claims that the lawyers of the deep state come from the video below that was published on February 18, 2020 on YouTube. These are the deep state being exposed, talking about the attorneys.
The president tweeted about the Roger Stone thing. Now there are something like 2,000 different people who were in the DOJ have signed this petition to have him quit. He's not going to quit.
No, look, this is the deep state being exposed. These people do not want accountability. There are about 110,000 people at the Department of Justice. Roughly 10,000 of them are attorneys. There's one key thing that has to happen here. Most people don't realize this. I was chairman of the Oversight Committee. The inspectors general out there can go out and inspect anything going on in the federal government except attorneys at the Department of Justice. Justice. They can look at individual cases, but the one group of people that's exempt are attorneys at the Department of Justice. So there's a bill.
This is like a rule written by attorneys at the Department of Justice.
Amazing how this is. H.R. 202, I'll give credit to Cedric Richmond, Democrat from Louisiana, Jody Heiss, a Republican, pushed through a piece of legislation passed by voice vote in the House, allowing inspectors general to go and look at these individual attorneys. I think they're scared to death of Donald Trump and Barr and Durham and certainly Horowitz, because they don't want people peeling back the onion, looking under the hood at how these people have operated at the Department of Justice. That's why they're firing back, but now they're being exposed. Go ahead and put your name out there.
Speaking of individual lawyers, one of them that signed this was named in the FICE abuse report.
Okay, what that does when they give themselves immunity like that is they cut you off from any sort of remedy if they were to tort you. If you follow what I'm saying, they're not elected and they're not appointed to do anything for a large group of people. They're private attorneys, and that's a private membership association that's hijacked the DOJ. They've also hijacked the from the Bar Treaty of 1949 or 47. They hijacked the grand jury to where you can't go to the grand jury anymore. That's why they needed to get rid of the common law. So they're trying to get rid of the common law. They still haven't gotten rid of it, but they're trying to get rid of it. So you can't go to the grand jury and present any crimes that they committed. So they gave themselves immunity and then stopped themselves from being prosecuted. Now, if anybody can't see the conspiracy here to do this, that's sad. I'm sorry that you don't see that's what these guys are doing. So it's a facade, is what it is. The facade is that you don't have intangible property rights to these things anymore. That's a facade. They essentially created a system, and there was a system there. They created their own system within that system, and then hijacked the other system, making it appear as if they got it. They took the whole system. So anyway.
Yep. The ABA members created the Declaration of Interdependence, trafficking millions of persons under that declaration. Now,
that's where they amended the state constitutions, hijacking the judicial departments, which is in violation of the law of nations. That's attacking a constitution and taking it over. That's called conquering. When they conquer a state constitution, that's attack, and that would be considered a violation of the law of nations. It's a capital crime.
Yep, the violation of Book 1, Chapter 3 of the Constitution of a State and Duties and the Rights of a Nation, Paragraph 30 within the Law of Nations. It's an attack against the Constitution of the state and in violation of its laws, which as Special Prosecutor Keith just defined as a crime against society.
Capital crime. Capital crimes are punishable by death. It's a death offense. And these guys are putting people in jail. Now they control whether murderers stay in jail or not, which means they're using criminals, and this is why they've been trying to get rid of the death penalty. They're using criminals as leverage to keep themselves in business, leverage against society. As they say, oh, really? You want to get rid of us? What happens to the criminals? They're going to go back into society, and they're going to start hurting you again. So you might want to keep us, in our capital criminal condition here, and tell our police force, the Rothschild's police force, what to do. Because the police only move when a lawyer says so. They don't ever listen to you. They only move when a lawyer says so. A lawyer is a judge. A judge is a lawyer. You have to be part of the bar in order to be a judge. That's what we mean by hijacking it. not just anybody can be a judge. So therefore the police are serving the lawyers, not the state, which is causing this issue that they're having now. It's the Rothschilds that have been attacking the black people, not anyone else.
So
They've been doing it through their courts.
They say that there's more prisoners per capita in this country than all countries combined. And are you saying that's all under the Rothschild system?
Yes. I'm not saying it. Rothschilds are saying it. They're telling you that that's what they're doing. It's the Rothschilds that have been eradicating through Planned Parenthood the people in what they call the black community or black neighborhood. They say it, I don't. They're the ones that are doing it through those radicalized individuals that are implementing what the edicts are, EDICC or CT. So when they're doing this, they're blaming everybody instead of looking at who's literally doing it. And they're doing it through the Democratic Party. They're doing it through the Republican Party, which are all private companies, 527 organizations. And they have, like I said, their own police force, and they created them through the United Nations, through the Senate. The Senate created these agencies within departments of the original constitutions and started working through those agencies to implement the New World Order and to implement the killing and disposal of people until they get them to a manageable size or number that they want. But that's slavery. You can't dispose of people that you don't own and never could own, especially if you said you can't own anybody, because it said no slavery in all of its forms within the UDHR. So go ahead, Doherty.
Yep. Furthermore, if you take on the responsibility of taking over the obligation of judicial departments, it means you must uphold the law of nations. And when you don't uphold those obligations, you have failed to uphold the Constitution of the state by withholding the social compact agreements to lay the foundation for a legal society to adopt a constitution, as is written within 8 state constitutions. And then we'll just this link here. Social compact agreement is necessary. In 8 different state constitutions, a social compact is mentioned, and the state of Maryland says it is required in order to form a state. If you have not signed a social compact agreement, you are without obligations and therefore without any rights. Now, a social compact agreement is a basic statement amongst people that say this is how we're going to establish a legal society, how we're going to treat each other. We'll set up offices legally. It's to set up the legal foundation for you to potentially adopt the state constitution. The state of Florida, that all free men, when they form a social compact, are equal and have certain inherent and feasible rights. State of Mississippi, that all free men, when they form a social compact, are equal in rights, and that no man or set of men are entitled to exclusive, separate public emoluments or privileges from the community, but in consideration of public services.
And now you know why they got rid of the social compact, because they wanted to set up public emoluments and privileges from the community in consideration of public service. That's what they hid it under.
Without consideration of the people.
Yeah.
They created their own privileged society.
They wanted exclusive, separate public emoluments or privileges. And it says it right there in the state constitutions, at least 8 of them, and they did it anyways. Just that quick.
Wouldn't that be a foreign emolument?
Yeah. Serving a foreign thing. So what happens is that when people are brought into court, they're literally being brought into under the City of London and under the City of London's laws, that corporation. People think it's from 1868, and that the fact that the DC District of Columbia created some kind of municipality. That's just a pass-through municipality. over to your offshore Internal Revenue Trust, okay? When you go into the court, they're literally kidnapping you from the states of the union or the states, and you look in a geographical area. If you look outside, okay, that's not the city of London. So they created all these little rooms and surveys within the courtrooms under the bar associations that you're walking and stepping into the city of London, protected by the commander-in-chief, because his flag is always in the room. His Title IV flag, which is the gold fringe flag. That's the commander-in-chief's flag. You're literally being kidnapped.
Yep. When you walk through those metal detectors, you're literally going through customs into the city of London. It's one of the reasons they only accept their private corporate script. Federal
They
Reserve
do it,
notes.
yeah, in cash, by the way, and they only accept their driver's license. So they're doing it through the driver's license. That's how they're getting you in, as far as some kind of passport. I don't know how that driver's license is whether it's going through their commerce or how they define it. We can figure that out later. That's not a big deal. We just do know that they require a driver's license, and notice that that's really the only form of ID that you have around this country, is the driver's license to say who you are. You have to have it, type thing, you know. And they put you in jail if you don't have it. So if you don't accept the Rothschild's identification and you don't accept their jurisdiction under the City of London, then they throw you in jail until you do.
Yep. Just for the record, the state of Texas acknowledges that you need a social compact. State of Connecticut, state of Maryland. All government of right originates from the people, is founded in compact only. State of Virginia. Whoops, what's going on? That all men by nature are equally free and independent, have certain inherent rights of which when they enter into a state of society, they cannot by any compact deprive it of vested posterity, namely the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring and possessing property and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety.
Yeah, they're not supposed to be able to cut other people out of that.
Big no-no.
And they do. That's what they call a privileged class of people.
In conclusion, the purpose of this case has been to free the people from any false obligations and responsibilities that benefit only the Rothschild system of debt instruments. Based on the previously stated communication, the claimant and prosecutor request that this court move to serve the proper documents to the respondent if found in default or guilty to the full extent possible. Respectfully submitted, Christopher Michael Doherty, ANU Legal Liaison. I yield the floor to Michael Adam Fathauer if you would like to proceed.
Thank you, Christopher Michael Doherty. This is Michael Adam Fathauer here as second prosecutor, and I'd like to share screens. I'm going to be talking about my advantage or perspective point is from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we've already covered. So this is going to have a slightly different angle or perspective, but completely support the aforementioned claims that this court has heard today. Okay, everyone can see the screen share. Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Michael Adam Fathauer, as second prosecutor, hereby presents the following evidence for consideration to the Human Rights Tribunal International for prosecution of the Rothschilds family. I'd like to start by reading the preamble from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I quote, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights preamble, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world, whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. End quote. And that was from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or UDHR, adopted by the UN General Assembly on the 10th day of December, 1948, and drafted by Eleanor Roosevelt. So this is a statement by me, a question at first. How can man be free if he is stuck in perpetual servitude in a system which exclusively uses a debt-based currency? Why are we as a society chasing interest to pay off a debt which is impossible to collect and recover from due to a misappropriation of value, the debt-based currency, legal impossibilities, fractional reserving, forced association, and the creation of a proletariat class through manipulation of funds? So let me see here. Okay, I just had one that I liked, a definition of the word proletariat. And this is a quote from Britannica.com. It says, proletariat, the lowest or one of the lowest economic and social classes in society. So I picked that because it's obvious that there is a ruling class and that there is a working class that is subject to that control or that infrastructure that's in place. So the next thing I'd like to do is read an excerpt from the Communist Manifesto. It says, quote, the class of wage earners, especially those who earn their living by manual labor or who are dependent for support on daily or casual employment, the working class. In Marxist theory, the class of workers, especially industrial wage earners who do not possess capital or property and must sell their labor to survive. The lowest or poorest class of people possessing no property were especially found in ancient Rome. And that was from dictionary.com for the word proletariat. Another word or definition I wanted to share with everybody is remuneration, which is defined as money paid for work or service. And an example is they work in excess of their contracted hours for no additional remuneration. And I have the link below for that definition. Okay, I think, let's see here. Okay, so earlier when I said that I was reading from the Communism or the Communist Manifesto, I haven't yet. So I'm going to now under the word remuneration here. So quotes from the Communist Manifesto by what was it again, Christopher? Bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie. Yep, and the proletariat.
So quotes from the Communist Manifesto, bourgeoisie and proletariat. Quote, but at this stage, a new struggle was formed between the bourgeoisie, the property-owning class, and the proletariat, the industrial working class, end quote. Quote, Marx believed that capitalism contained the seeds of its own destruction. He described how the wealth of, man, I can't say that word, bourgeoisie. Yeah, this is crazy. Bourgeoisie depended on the work of the proletariat. Therefore, capitalism requires an underclass. But Marx predicted that the continued exploitation of this underclass would create great resentment. Eventually, the proletariat would lead a revolution against the bourgeoisie. Following the proletariat's defeat of capitalism, a new classless society would emerge based on the idea from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs. And such a society, land, industry, labor, and wealth would be shared between all people. All people would have the right to an education and class structures would disappear. Harmony would reign and the state would simply wither away. And I have a link there showing where I got that information from. The next statement here is from Hannon. I don't know how to say that. Hannon Bent to her land. But it talks about, go ahead. Yeah.
If that's the case, then what you're saying is that the scheme of the Rothschilds is creating this conflict between communism and social or capitalism.
Right, and the evidence that capitalism exists is clear because there's evidence of the proletariat class. I know I've worked my ass off my whole life, and I mean, the equivalent to building a house and then resting and having shelter and then helping other people with their needs isn't what I've experienced. I've probably built 10 houses and never lived in any of them. You know, I'm fortunate to own a house now, but at 35 years old, almost 36, I'm just now able to do that. Not even by myself. Can't even afford a house by myself. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to show.
That they created this fight and the struggle between capitalism and socialism. I'm sorry, capitalism and communism. So it was a creation of both. And basically it becomes a cycle of a nightmare.
Yeah, it has characteristics of both. And when you mentioned earlier the torture that people go through when they lose their equity, I've been cut. When my father passed away in the past, he willed the house to me at the time, and I cut the grass, took care of the property for 7 years, and I remember vividly cutting the grass and wondering, you know, am I cutting the bank's grass today? You know what I mean? So that was torture. Going through that was torture. And I easily had 30,000 in equity in that home. But I've picked and choose my battles, and I'm very thankful to be a part of the prosecution today, because I'm not the only one that's been negatively affected by this. And I don't even think I got the bad end of the stick because I still have private property and other things. This next little bit that I'd like to read is about the Federal Reserve Bank and their branches, and it talks about the 8 different families that are behind most companies and most of the private banking systems. So CPA Thomas D. Schaff corroborates McAllister's claims, adding that 10 banks control all 12 Federal Reserve Bank branches. He names N.M. Rothschild of London, Rothschild Bank of Berlin, Warburg Bank of Hamburg, Warburg Bank of Amsterdam, Lehman Brothers of New York, Lazard Brothers of Paris, Kunloeb Bank of New York, Israel Moses Saif Bank of Italy, Goldman Sachs of New York, and JP Morgan Chase Bank of New York. And an interesting thing is that the Rothschilds, a lot of people are showing how they're actually behind JP Morgan, that they use that as one of their popular fronts to not have their name directly involved with what's going on. So Schaff continues down here. Schaff lists William Rockefeller and Paul Wahlberg, Jacob Schiff, and James Stillman as individuals who own large shares of the Fed. And he says the Schiffs are insiders at Kuhn-Loeb. The Stillmans are Citigroup insiders who married into the Rockefeller clan at the turn of the century. Eustace Mullins came to the same conclusions in his book, The Secrets of the Federal Reserve, in which he displays charts connecting the Fed and its member banks to the families of Rothschild, Warburg, Rockefeller, and the others. The control that these banking families exert over the global economy cannot be overstated and is quite intentionally shrouded in secrecy. And I want to quickly pause right there. The information is overwhelming, pointing to the bad track record that this family has. And Christopher Michael Doherty did a great job of laying out the timeline and connecting the Rothschilds family to the Federal Reserve and also to the banking and some of the bailouts so that they could buy things at pennies to the dollar and then resell them. And overnight, like Keith mentioned, go from a trailer to a huge building, because I've never been able to do that. You know, I've gone from a nice building to on the streets before, but that was really easy. So next here, a historical perspective. I'll have the quote at the end, or the site for this quote. A historical perspective, the banking monopoly or introduction, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. In 1913, the US Congress passed a bill called the Federal Reserve Act. And this bill allowed an independent non-government group to privatize and take control of America's monetary system. The Federal Reserve Bank's name was chosen by this group so as to deceive the American people into believing that the Federal Reserve was a branch of the US government. This privately held monopoly continues even today to give enormous power to a handful of international bankers, non-Americans, to issue America's money, to set interest rates, to finance endless wars, and to enslave the American citizens and the other nations of the world in a state of perpetual debt. This debt-based monetary system is what has destroyed the American economy and has brought with it depressions and recessions for several generations. This will continue until the Federal Reserve and the fractional reserve lending practices of the centralized banks cease to exist. The privately held central bank, deceptively known as the Federal Reserve, is pictured right there. Facts about the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a privately owned for-profit corporation. The Federal Reserve has no reserves. The name was created prior to the Federal Reserve Act, which was passed in 1913. And this was done to make Americans believe that the US banking system operated in the public interest. The Federal Reserve is a private bank owned by private shareholders and runs purely for private profits. The result has been the creation of a debt-based monopoly that must be paid for by the American taxpayer, which was mentioned earlier, where they shift liability but still take and steal from you. As of this writing, the US national debt is nearly $20 trillion. I didn't take note. If you look at the link, the criminalbankingmonopoly.wordpress.com, you could see, I think it was 2016 was what the $20 trillion was pegged to on the debt clock. It says the US debt clock for an update as to how much debt this has ballooned. This privately held business pays no taxes on the trillions of dollars it makes. The next article talks about how the Federal Reserve has its own police, and it's a part of a vast surveillance center. And should you worry? By Pam Martins and Russ Martins, June 15th, 2020.
If it pays no taxes on anything it makes, that means it has the same immunity as the tripartite, which will be the connection between the tripartite and the Federal Reserve.
That's a good observation. I didn't make that connection personally just now.
Okay.
It says,
surveillance. Yeah, surveillance. Good.
Thank you. Former Police Commissioner Raymond Kelly inside the Lower Manhattan Security Coordinator Center. Without any congressional hearings on the matter, the USA Patriot Act in 2001 bestowed on the 12 regional Federal Reserve banks domestic policing powers. While the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in Washington, D.C. is deemed an independent federal agency, end quote, with its chair and governors appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, the 12 regional Fed banks are private corporations owned by the member banks in their region. As settled law under John L. Lewis versus United States confirms, quote, each Federal Reserve Bank is a separate corporation owned by commercial banks in its region. In the case of the New York Fed, which is located in the Wall Street area of Manhattan, its largest share owners are behemoth multinational banks, including J.P. Morgan, Chase, which is the Rothschilds family, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley. So what the USA Patriot Act effectively did was to give multinational corporations domestic policing powers in New York City via the New York Fed. Section 364 of the USA Patriot Act reads as follows, quote, law enforcement officers designated or authorized by the board or a reserve bank under paragraph 1 or paragraph 2 are authorized while on duty to carry firearms and make arrests without warrants for any offense against the United States committed in their presence. Such officers shall have access to law enforcement information that may be necessary for the protection of the property or personnel of the board or a reserve bank. And that's from wallstreetonparade.com. So this is a little statement by myself. and the connections I've been making from the links that I've shared so far and that I will share, without third-party interlopers and third-party interveners, the world would naturally fall back into peace and harmony due to there not being any thirst or want in life, just to hold and to have basic comforts in life like shelter, family, and a future with certainties by way of direct control without harmful, malicious, and criminal intervention of each person, pursuing their own happiness and lot without conditional ownership, which is actually slavery. And it would quickly become the new reality that we live in. One of the many thorns in man's side, causing discomfort and creating death and scarcity of value through private lending and insider trading, is the Rothschild family. Has anything good come from the Rothschild's family? When will housing be affordable? When will it become a reality to own private property without the threat of losing it to foreign associations and private banks? I personally have experienced loss of equity over the years through losing private property when the private Federal Reserve notes were in scarcity due to inflation and interest attached to the Federal Reserve Bank loaning a private fiat currency at interest, which is clearly intentional and a foundational design of the Federal Reserve Bank. I have witnessed people working unimaginable schedules and many hours of hard labor only to lose their grasp on their private property, equity, or value obtained through a debt-based currency controlled privately and designed to fail. Chasing interest creates tension and anything, let me start that over. Chasing interest creates tension and an, quote, anything to keep my head above water, end quote, mindset amongst the population which is inciting violence and civil unrest by war of attrition. The Rothschild's family, through private lending, are feeding off of the fruits of the innocent instead of offering gifts to our brothers and sisters. We become more or less forced to cut corners and scheme our neighbors so that we can, quote, get ours, end quote, to maintain our creature comforts and enjoy private property, which to some is merely leased to them at a cost. With perpetual debt slavery, ownership of private property slips through our fingertips as we work just to survive. If two people are on an island together in a closed economy with no currency or system in place to track and exchange value between them, and they choose freely or are unknowingly conditioned to accept a third party's solution to them of a debt-based currency loaned to them for use at interest through deceit and propaganda or circumstances out of their control, is a rigged game to which failure and collapse become certain, and naturally, a proletariat working class emerges and remains into servitude, chasing interest which does not exist in circulation. Only one of the two people in this example will be able to obtain and pay back the loan's principal and the interest, while the other will not find the money in circulation, because the added interest due to pay back the original loan or principal was never put into circulation or never existed, creating a legal impossibility to satisfy the loan while also creating perpetual debt and economic slavery. So this certainty of failure by design happens through a term called usury, and I have two different examples. One of them is from, it's a Google source, and I have the link there. So basically it's the illegal action or practice of lending money at unreasonably high rates of interest. That might not be the best definition to some, because underneath the Old Testament says, quote, condemns the practice of charging interest. So it's saying that the practice of charging interest at all is usury. So the top definition kind of snuck through earlier during my research now that I'm looking at it, because they say unreasonably high rates of interest. So that's kind of like planting a seed that usury is okay with certain conditions. So that's not what I'm trying to get across. So the Old Testament, quote, condemns the practice of charging interest because a loan should be an act of compassion and taking care of one's neighbor, end quote. It teaches that, quote, Making a profit off a loan is exploiting that person and dishonoring God's covenant. Exodus 22:25 through 27, end quotes. And that was a source from Wikipedia. So after that, I have another little statement I put in here. And when the third-party interlopers or blood-sucking ticks are out of the way, man can enjoy the fruits of his labor and will get back to what he puts out, creating a harmonious, equal exchange relationship between man's efforts and the direct rewards of his efforts, putting him in the position to contribute to society instead of taking. When God's abundance is present without obstruction or interference, man no longer wants or desires for himself alone, but instead looks to his fellow man for their wants and needs, and is in a position to gift without expectation, unconditionally without interest, without forced association and usury. The Rothschild's family track record from my limited research shows that a definite pattern of usury, economic slavery, and complete disregard for humankind exists and persists and goes against scriptures and the law of nations. Denying a national currency to the people is slavery, and by controlling a nation's currency by inserting a private fiat currency or war script is slavery by forced association. Without a nationality, we also lose our freedom of speech and expression. Without freedom of speech and expression, we lose the ability to make a claim and own private property. Without private property rights and claims, we have nothing. The violation of Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights violates all articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights because Article 4 states that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. So it automatically violates all the articles of the UDHR, and it supports what Keith was saying, where are we being stolen from, or are we a slave? Because slaves don't have property and free men do. So let me see here. Okay, I'm going to get back to where I was. The following articles from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights supports the above statements and claims in this Human Rights Tribunal International case against the Rothschild family. So I'll read again Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where it states, "No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms." And then I'll move down to Article 15, and then Article 20, and those are the only three that I'll mention because those three really rang true with me, even though I knew right away Article 4 was grounds for violation of all articles. Article 15 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to a nationality, and no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his nationality, nor denied the right to change his nationality. So the currency in a country, from what I've learned before, shows different, it might have monuments, it might have a slogan, or it might have symbolism that the country is actually a part of. When you look at a Federal Reserve note, and when I look at a Federal Reserve note, especially the $1 bill, that's not my national currency. That's a private script. And those symbols, those are nothing that I'd like to be associated with. Article 20 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and no one may be compelled to belong to an association. And that would end my contribution as second prosecutor, and hopefully it was appropriate and in line with what Christopher Michael Doherty said, and it supports Keith Edward Livingway's presentation, and I yield the floor. Thank you.
The opposing counsel has a statement, I believe. Mr. Rowe? See if he's there.
Okay, sorry, my mic wouldn't
Yeah.
come on there. Okay, what I'm saying is there's other claims that's already been filed, brought into discovery. those claims exist whether or not the respondents from the other side show up, whether they appear now or in the future. And so therefore, these other claims stand on their own merit. And due to that, there's rights by claim that exist, whether now or in future cases. And those rights will herein be reserved for use by the claimants in those filings. Secondly, I would like to say that the things shown herein on the Federal Reserve, a lot of these are regulatory rules. Those regulatory rules fall under mala prohibita crimes. They're only crimes because somebody in the upper echelon of government decided they were. But when these statutes were created and brought in force, basically what that really means is they would be obligated like any other statute. They have to have a remedy basis appended to them, and they have to be in law with human rights, the law of nations, and other forces that should be allowed to prevail. And apparently that has not happened in these cases, and therefore on behalf of the American National Union and its legal department, I must insist that this be brought into the record at this time. And that is all that at the moment that I have to contribute to the case, and I'll yield it back over to the proper motion in charge. Thank you very much.
Okay, does International Notary Peter Nickel have any questions?
This is International Notary Peter Nickel. I do not believe I have questions at this time.
Does International Notary Trent Wesley Saylor have any questions?
International Notary Trent Winsley Saylor does not have any questions at this time.
And this is International Notary Adam Samuel Benkinnon, and I have no questions neither. Are any of the respondents in the room? I'll ask again. Are any of the respondents in the room? Hearing no answer from the respondents, are there any closing statements from the prosecution?
This is Christopher Michael Doherty. The prosecution on my behalf is already commenced. It's ended, I should say.
Just on the one part of what the opposing counsel was stating, that if there was no remedy written within the Federal Reserve System, that is the very definition of slavery and a claim of disposal rights against fellow human beings. That was all.
And that's a maxim, right? Who creates the liability must provide the relief.
Yeah, if you create a, just like we have, if you create an objection, you have to have a remedy. And that way you have smooth running government. If you have no remedy, then you have nothing but chaos and argument and these sorts of things. And if you have no remedy for somebody to be able to say, okay, look, you're gigantic and I'm not. Our Father in heaven even has remedy, many remedies. He had to put in a remedy to save people from hell. Otherwise, it would have been an illegal situation or an unlawful situation. So even the creator of the universe has a remedy and created one. So that being the case, I don't believe anyone here is above him. So away you go. So special prosecutor rests, and I'll yield this over to Mr. Fathauer.
This is Michael Adam Fathauer. I have no other further statements in closing. Thank you. I yield.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And I'll go ahead and turn the court over to the clerk to adjourn the court. Thank you.
The clerk now calls for any late issues that did not make today's itinerary. Second and final call for last-minute matters to be placed on the record. There being no additional topics for the record, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second for the motion to adjourn?
Second.
Are there any objections? Then there being no further objections, then at approximately 3:25 UTC -6, this convening of the Human Rights Tribunal International on the 93rd day in the year of Yahweh 6022 is now adjourned to be reconvened at a future date certain. Please stop.
Correction, that'd be 4:20, 4, not 3. Just one, make that correction.
4:20 UTC -6.
Yeah.
No, correction again. Correction again. It's 5:29 UTC -6.
No, UTC -6 is central, so it'll be 4:26.
Not anymore because it doesn't recognize daylight savings time.
Fair enough.
All right.
I yield.
Correction. And the tribunal is now adjourned to be convened at a future date certain. Please stop the recording.